Hi, my name is Sandra Gomez.
Hi there, my name is Kelly Shabetta.
Hi, my name is Rameza Uzman.
And I'm Dario Ghostin. Our presentation today is on the article, Warning, Labels May Cause Serious Side Effects for Learning Disabled Students. Just a friendly reminder, don't put people in boxes. Our key concepts include labeling, which is the process whereby descriptions are attached to individuals or groups, which, in turn, guides the attitudes and behaviors of others towards them. Scratch that, which is a voice command in a speech recognition software, drag and dictate, that tells the application to erase the last word or phrase that the user dictated. Ableism, which is description or prejudice against individuals with disabilities. Stigma, a stereotype, prejudgment, or criticism of individuals who deviate from the norm, making them abnormal and defective.
Key concepts continued. The social model. This model says that people are disabled by barriers in society, not by their impairment or difference. Barriers can be physical, like buildings not having accessible toilets, or they can be caused by people's attitudes to difference, like assuming disabled people can't do a certain thing. The social model helps us recognize barriers that make life harder for disabled people. Removing these barriers creates equality and offers disabled people more independence, choice, and control. Medical model. The medical model views disability as a defect within the individual. Disability is an aberration compared to normal traits and characteristics. In order to have a high quality of life, these defects must be cured, fixed, or completely eliminated. Healthcare and social service professionals have the sole power to correct or modify these conditions. Human rights. Human rights are the rights to which persons are inherently entitled because they are human beings. Oppression. Oppression is a state of being subject to unjust treatment or control.
In the article, Warning, Labels May Cause Serious Side Effects for Learning Disabled Students, the authors discuss in first person the labeling encounters they face while attending school and how it can cause harm to students. The authors start the article by using a speech recognition software called Drag and Dictate, where one author tries to describe herself based on how the world sees her. Unlike the real world, the software allows the user to erase the last thing the user said by saying the command, scratch that. The concept of scratch that used in the article is compelling as it forces the reader to view how labeling someone can have serious side effects, which isn't as easy as saying a simple command to erase. Throughout the article, the author forces the reader to put themselves in the shoes of the author and other students subjected to mislabeling. The Canadian and Ontario Human Rights Codes were created to ensure that educational institutes provide accommodations to students and that all students are on an equal playing field. Labeling was designed with good intentions and was created to try to ensure fairness for all students. Labeling creates stereotypes and stigmas, which lead students to feel like outsiders, imposters, and rejected by their peers. Even with this policy, students around the world, including the authors, were still met with resistance and labeling when trying to apply for accommodations. Many students were accused of wanting special treatment and not having disabilities, as well as just being lazy. In order to receive a special accommodation, students are required to identify as a student with a learning disability and release medical information to confirm their diagnosis. Without this label, students are not allowed to receive any accommodation. The author explains how this is considered a double-edged sword. If students deny this label, they will not receive the help they need to level the playing field to succeed academically. And if they take on this label, they automatically inherit the stigma that goes with it. Labeling in schools places barriers that prevent students from being included and often group students in the wrong categories. Instead of labeling students, the author suggests that schools start by holding conversation with students and evaluating them individually to determine the student's learning style. They even give suggestions, such as offering take-home and in-class exams to accommodate and assess different learning styles. The Learning Disabilities Association of Canada states, learning disabilities may affect the individual's capacity to receive, process, and communicate information in traditional formats. Students may not learn the traditional way, such as by reading a book or listening to a lecture. A student requesting accommodation for a class doesn't automatically mean they are asking for less work or special treatment. Often they request simple but effective modifications that will assist them in learning the same information and completing the same work as other students. Incorporating other learning techniques such as using pictures, films, social media, and implementing the use of technology into learning is a simple solution to address multiple learning styles. In higher education, where the educational structure still needs upgrading from traditional thinking, automatically implementing other learning styles throughout courses will help reduce the number of accommodation requests. It would also help other students that learn differently from the traditional way succeed in school, as they might be too ashamed due to the stigma to ask for an accommodation or cannot produce proof that an accommodation is needed.
The language used associated with labeling has evolved over time, but continues to be contentious and oppressive. Terms introduced early on clinically by physicians, such as retarded, were initially thought of as humane. The hope was to encourage change in how society would treat those labeled and encourage better living. Instead, the words had unintended negative consequences. These words, or labels as we call them, took on a life of their own, and many derogatory uses of the words evolved. Although the word retarded has generally been removed from conversations, it has been replaced with vocabulary such as weakness, deficit, and disorder. No matter how we look at these labels and how they change, they still imply the same thing, that these students are different from the norm. Educational institutions need to move away from the medical model approach when assessing students and their needs. They need to shift their focus from an individual problem to an institutional problem using the social model of disability. The social model encompasses the idea of diversity and how knowledge is transferred differently to each individual student. Change needs to occur in how educational institutions identify normalcy and address the diverse learner and provide opportunities for them to achieve success, focusing on their strengths, not pigeonholing them to their weaknesses.
I'm going to be doing the summary on the article, A Lot of Kids' Needs Are Not Being Met. Lots of labels, lack of resources for students with special needs. The article, Lots of Labels but Not Enough Resources for Students with Special Needs, highlights the inaccessibility that children across the spectrum have to adequate education accommodations. Parents and teachers alike are pointing out flaws and navigating issues inside the educational model. They are demanding social change to the way that parents and teachers can get and dispatch help for students who need it. Specialty trained teachers are not only responsible for teaching special needs students individually, but also expected to teach students in large groups, leading to children slipping through the system without the help that they need. Heather Smith, the president of the Canadian Teachers Federation, points out that not all teachers are specialized or trained to deal with students with disabilities and can't possibly be experts in every type of disability. Heather goes on to explain that more help is needed in the classroom and more access to specialized teachers, psychologists, educational assistants, and social workers are needed if we are to face this nationwide pandemic and win it. Serious diagnoses are linked to accessibility outcomes. Smith points out that funding is a numerical algorithm and not based on actual needs. The systematic linear labeling leads to cracks in which students only needing more moderate support can be missed and neglected by systems made to protect them nationwide. While labels can be in some instances positive, if there is no direct help with a diagnosis, then applying the label only helps to bring more awareness to the person's disability without actually treating the root cause. IEP, in this case, are labels attached to students to help them put into action a plan that can help them reach their educational goals while trying to navigate the educational system. IEPs, in this case, is often not enough, especially in a system lacking resources. Jacqueline points out that the IEPs are expensive and time consuming and lack an individual approach when it comes to dealing with students. As the director of the Canadian Research Centre on Inclusive Education, Jacqueline makes a very strong argument for the negative impact of labeling individuals with disabilities using the IEPs and points out that even the best plan can be the wrong plan since everyone learns differently.
The link between the main reading, warning, labels may cause serious side effects for learning disabled students, and the news article, lots of labels but not enough resources for students with special needs by CBC News.
Nicole Riva's article tries to shift away from the view of learning disabilities as a defect within the individual, as posited by the medical model, and attempts to perceive disabilities within the social model. The social model perceives individuals as being disabled by barriers within the society rather than their impairment. The creation of an IEP for a student isn't the solution, rather, it's the first step in acquiring a solution. And these IEPs only tend to confuse and frustrate parents when they're trying to figure out the best way to implement the IEP. This frustration is common among both the educators and the parents alike because they're frustrated at the lack of adequate and appropriate resources needed to support those with learning disabilities, which in this case are students and children. The article also presents statements from these same parents, teachers, and administrators as they express their frustrations and offer recommendations to help implement appropriate strategies to help students obtain the help they need in line with their learning disabilities. In both LaMonica and Chenard's paper and Nicole Riva's article, we see a heavy focus on labeling students with disabilities that helps designate them as deserving of extra help. But this isn't actually enough to figure out what actually must be done to help such students. While educators often need to give extra help to those with learning disabilities or special needs, there's a severe lack of funding, resources, support for both students and teachers alike, and a lack of accessibilities to properly trained educators. A great example of this is a statement by Heidi Bernhardt, who is the executive director of the Centre of ADHD Awareness in Canada, who asserts implementing the IEP does not always require extra resources and can be easy as giving a student some extra help and extra time in understanding a project. However, the problem, once again, lies in the teacher's inability to dedicate this extra time because there is no extra time that they are given or allotted within their schedules to dedicate, thus creating another barrier. Teachers are helpless because they're overburdened, overworked with the responsibilities of too many students, while not having enough time to actually give each student the time and attention they deserve. The individual education plan is a double-edged sword, as described by LaMonica and Chenard, in that it's useful in verifying a person's disability and need for extra help, but it also plays a role in adding to the stigma surrounding this disability in education. This is because the IEP designates an institutional label on the student as a special needs student who has abnormal or unusual needs that require extra time, effort, and support to help them succeed. This label perpetuates attitudinal and practical barriers to inclusion as it creates a perception that students on IEPs are less able to learn. And thus, they need special teaching methods, which isn't always true, referencing back to Heidi Bernhardt's statement. While the creation of IEP feeds into the medical model of disability within the education system, as it designates the student eligible for extra support, Riva's article sheds light on the reality of IEP implementation, which is far from ideal and only goes on to show the barriers within society and the education system that serve as obstacles to an equitable learning experience for those with special needs, thus adding support for the social model of disability. The current education system, as it stands, aims to appoint students with learning disabilities as the problem and barrier in their own education and success via the creation of IEPs. But the reality of the matter is, the problem lies within this education system's labeling and support processes, or the lack of, and not the student. Thus, the recommendation would be to create and develop new strategies that actually help support IEP implementation rather than creating an IEP and just handing it off to the parents and letting them figure out what to do next. As a lot of these parents are not aware of the many resources that are available because nothing has been done to support them in that manner.
Question 1. What are your thoughts on the idea that labeling students early on in their educational journey can turn that label into a self-fulfilling prophecy? Question 2. After listening to this presentation, critically think about the need to provide proof of medical diagnosis before any support can be initiated. Is this necessary? Do you agree or disagree with this process? Or is there a different avenue that could be taken that allows students the autonomy to access their individual needs?
Thank you for watching our student-led seminar on the article, Warning, Labels May Cause Serious Side Effects for Learning Disabled Students.